Rock fans from all around the world, welcome to another MPJ special guest. I'm not going to call it interview anymore. I'm just going to call it special guest. And tonight we have Rob Wylde from the Wild Side. No, he's not from the Wild Side. Well, he is because he's a rock and roll star. But he is from a band called Midnite City. Hi there, Rob.
Hi, Nigel. Hi, Trish. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So, Rob, if let's start off with the obvious question. Then you obviously, I don't know, people maybe tuning in might not kind of maybe guess that you are in a rock and roll band. I mean, your clothes, your hair doesn't really give much away. So let's explain to them then. If somebody come up to you in a pub and said, Rob, so your band, so what sort of music do you play then? What would be your reply?
My reply would be very simple. Hair metal, basically 80s hair metal. That's it in a nutshell. Even though it's 2025, we don't care about that. We're playing music that sounds like it came out in 1988. So there you go.
and what got you to this point then? Is hair music, what we call classic rock, always been your jam? Always been your genre?
Yeah, I go back a long way. So prior to this band, I've been in lots and lots of bands. I'm not going to give my age away, but I've been doing this for a long time. Let's put it that way. And it all started with all the bands that we kind of sound like. So, when I was a little kid, my first favorite band and the band that my mum took me to see when I was 11 years old was the band Europe. Obviously the Final Countdown. And at the same time, I got into Bon Jovi, and then kind of, all the floodgates opened, Def Leppard, Poison, Kiss, all that stuff was basically all I listened to, from being 9 years old. And to be honest with you, it's pretty much all I still listen to. So, it was inevitable that even though I'd done some other things that maybe in the past slightly a little bit different, but it was inevitable that I was going to come back to the music that I started with when I was a kid, really.
See. Now I got in. Well, we're the same generation, mate. To be honest with you, absolutely. Yeah. That's what kind of when I grow up on. The likes of Whitesnake and Bon Jovi and all of those bands, which sort of I grew up on as well. Europe nearly put me off classic hair rock because I couldn't stand them. Couldn't stand Europe. I absolutely detested them. I watched them at Milton Keynes Bowl, and it was probably the worst gig I've ever been to. They were terrible. They were absolutely dreadful. So I was never a fan of Europe, but I was a fan of everything else. So grew up on things like Magnum, which I absolutely adored. Iron Maiden, all of those sort of classic kind of 80s kind of rock, and then obviously Guns N' Roses come in. Now, we talked to a lot of bands and old band members that kind of maybe grew up on that, but then kind of drift away. They find other genres. They like to discover kind of music. But it seems that is that a journey that you went on and then came back, or have you always gone? This is me, and this is what I identify with.
I think. I've pretty much always looked like this. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But I pretty much have, really, from being a little kid. I started growing my hair when I was like 13 years old, and by the time I left school, I had really long hair and stuff. And I always loved all this music. All the especially all the American bands. I didn't really like a lot of the English stuff. It was all the American bands that I was into. Yeah. And I was really into the glammy looking bands, all the makeup and all that kind of stuff, and the hairspray bands and all that kind of stuff, and started playing in bands from kind of being 15 and then going to a different band and a different band, and they were all kind of doing this kind of music really up until it got into sort of like the early 2000s, and then this kind of music just became so uncool, and it was almost like you couldn't play this music, and it was a really weird period in my life because I was only sort of in my sort of like early to mid 20s at that point, and already I was in a band that was kind of, it was just dead. We were going out and there was nobody coming out to see us, and people just saw it as, a bit of a joke, this kind of music. So it was kind of, at that point, I was kind of like, well, I've either got two options. I'm going to have to pack the music thing up for a while and hope that the music comes back around, which was never going to be a thing that I was going to, I can never give up music. The other thing was, I need to try and find a way of kind of updating the sound a little bit and the image and all that kind of stuff, which is what I did in 2003 when I formed a band called TCC, which was kind of more of a power pop sort of kind of Cheap Trick, kind of Marvelous Three sounding band. Had a little bit of my hair cut, not a lot, but it wasn't as long as this.
You're hanging on in there, Rob. You're hanging in there.
We just kind of updated a few things, and it was a little bit, I wouldn't say it was punky, but it was maybe a little bit pop punky, but it still had elements of 80s rock in it, basically. And then I managed to kind of get through that weird kind of era of music when it was all, new metal and all that kind of stuff. Managed to kind of like meander my way through that kind of difficult time. And then once that band came to an end, which I actually had for a good 10 years, then it was like, okay, this kind of stuff that I loved, back in the day is kind of coming back around again, and it's kind of like people don't ridicule it anymore. People actually think 80s rock's pretty cool nowadays. I mean, you just see, you put on TV and, whether it was the Motley Crue Dirt movie or the Nothing But a Good Time documentary, or, 80s rock is kind of cool again. So it's kind of, finally it came back round, and I could finally kind of like jump on the wave a little bit, the second time around, really.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of the rise of Nirvana was kind of the like that tipping point of like that, and it went downhill so fast, and then obviously then you got those kind of indie rock bands like Block Party and Franz Ferdinand and all that early 80s stuff, along with new metal, and we were kind of, and I was. I was still stuck in my 80s rock, and it wasn't only until when COVID hit that I kind of broadened my horizons massively, really. So okay, right. So we're going to reminisce here, because like name the best gig you saw in the 80s. What was the best gig?
Yeah, I'm not actually that. I'm not quite that old. I'm not quite that old. I was. Let's put it this way: in 1989, I was 12. So
we can't reminisce.
I can't reminisce, unfortunately. So the only gig I actually went to in the 80s was the Europe concert, which was my mum took me, which was a complete game changer and changed my life.
I'm glad they did something positive. That's all I can say.
Well, I probably wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for them.
Well, as I say, something positive came out of it. There we go. So, I was hoping to reminisce about Davey Roth and Steve Vai, which I saw in the 80s, and Bon Jovi.
No, I mean, I mean, a lot of that stuff I wanted to go to, but I was too young. I was a little
my
kid.
age now, though, Rob. I'm making you look much younger. Are you happy?
There we go. I'm very happy.
Having
said that, I saw a lot of bands in the very early 90s, like 1990, 91, 92. And there was still some of those bands hanging around then, Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Kiss, and and a lot of those big arena shows were still happening in the early 90s. So I managed to kind of catch the tail end of some of those bands. So that was cool.
Cool. Right, we get to a bit of the show now where we call it, it's called TT. It's the TT time. No, it is not your band. It's called Trish time. Trish time? Trish, let's fire some questions then, Trish.
Okay.
Because Trish, by the way, Trish really doesn't particularly like 80s music. And then she's forcing herself here. You know, oh my God,
she's definitely not going to like us.
Rob,
then.
She's obsessed. Rob, she's obsessed with 80s music. Obsessed.
Good. So am I.
I was going to jump in on your conversation earlier, and just to say that I think my first gig was probably 1991, and I went to see Bon Jovi at Wembley, and then I went to see them at Milton Keynes Bowl, and Billy Idol supported them.
I was there, yeah. I was at that one.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
I was at the Wembley gig for Bon Jovi. It was brilliant. It was brilliant.
Okay, so how did you get your start into music?
Well, it started. I mean, I was from being such a little kid. I loved music. I remember seeing Adamant on TV when I was about 4, and just thinking he was awesome. So that I kind of listened. I got into music and listened a lot of pop music. I still love pop music. So I've got an older sister, and she got me into Duran Duran when I was a real little kid. So I was probably about 6 or 7, and they kind of became my first sort of favorite band. And then they were kind of like the band that made me think, I want to do what they're doing, sort of thing. So I was really young. I was probably about 6 or 7 when I decided that I wanted to, be in a band, and I wanted to kind of do what they were doing. And as a little kid, I was always fascinated. I wanted to be a drummer, and so every birthday and every Christmas, I asked my parents for a drum kit, and they were having none of it. So we lived in a and I would. I mean, honestly, if any of my neighbours started playing drums, they would know about it. So they were right to refuse getting me a drum kit. But I just wouldn't give up. I just kept asking, and they're like, "You're not having a drum kit." So eventually, I gave in, and I said, "Well, can I have a guitar then?" So when I was 9 years old, for my birthday, I got a guitar, and then my mum started getting me guitar lessons. So I started playing guitar when I was 9, and then later that year was when I discovered Europe and Bon Jovi, and then it was suddenly like even more, okay, this is what I want to do, and especially going to that concert. So I took guitar lessons for years. In the meantime, I was also still bashing around on pots and pans, on my makeshift drum kit, because I couldn't get my own. I would just set up all like my dad's buckets and all kinds of crap. So I'd probably make just as much noise without a drum kit. And then everything kind of started changing when I started writing songs. So when I was about 11 years old, I started writing songs and singing. And then it was like, oh, okay. So I can kind of I can do most of these things. And I used to make these really terrible little demos on 2 ghetto blasters, and I would record on one and then flip the tape over and press record and play on the other. And I just became absolutely just obsessed with music. And then, buying Kerrang magazine and Raw magazine and buying all the home videos. And then my room as a 11, 12-year-old kid was just wall to wall 80s rock posters. And I never ever wanted to do anything else apart from play music. So it was that that really was a start. And then I started forming little bands with schoolmates that would last like a week. Because no one could actually play anything, but they all. I remember there's this kid that I used to go to school with. He had one of those really crappy Yamaha keyboards, and he would just kind of he would set the demo off, and he would pretend that he was playing it, and he was trying to convince me that what he was doing he was actually playing. But the little fun little afternoons, forming bands, and then I joined my first band when I was about 14, which was they were actually kind of a school rock band, and they actually needed a drummer. So I actually kind of, even though I didn't have a drum kit, I could, I knew how to play, and then eventually after that I just went out and bought a drum kit, and my mum and dad weren't very happy about it, but once it was in my room, they didn't really have.
What was the name of your rock band back in school?
My rock band at school, which was a very apt name, we were called Nightmare, which is exactly what we sounded like, because we were just, we haven't got a clue what, your first band, you haven't got the faintest clue what you're doing. So that didn't last very long. And then left school, and then I put together my first sort of serious rock band, which is a band called Inside Out, which I had for about 5 years, and that was cool. Because that was like my first taste of, getting in a transit van and traveling up and down the country, and, playing in pubs and clubs, and kind of like getting that first taste of doing that. And I loved it. And I did that for 5 years as a drummer. And then after all that, it was kind of, I was kind of, really young, and I loved playing drums, but the one thing I really hated was at the end of the gig, all the rest of the guys were at the bar talking to girls, and I was like, I was packing all my stuff away. So following that band, I said, you know what, I'm ditching drums, and I'm gonna sing, and I'm gonna play guitar, and we'll leave the drums to somebody else. So it kind of all went from there, band after band after band, and I've never not been in a band since I was, like 13 years old, 14 years old.
Wow.
Okay. What's the best advice you've ever been given as a musician?
Ooh, that's a good one. One thing that I don't know if it's a good piece of advice, but I remember someone once told me to kind of try and enjoy it a little bit more, because as you get, and I think this is more as I've got older, I start to take things, I take things probably a little bit too serious, and obviously it's really important. We take what we do as a band deadly serious, and I do as a singer. I'm just kind of like gig days are really boring days, because you think everything you think happens before a gig doesn't, and I have to, like, before every show I have to do vocal exercises for like an hour before singing, vocal warm downs afterwards. It's very, very boring. And sometimes I can get caught up in sort of maybe, it's important to obviously take what you do, take pride in what you do and try and be the best you can be. But at the same time, I think it's still got to be fun, So I think that piece of advice is quite good, as in, work hard, but, also have fun with it.
Enjoy the moment.
Enjoy the moment. And so, we've had some incredible moments, and sometimes over the past couple of years, some things have gone, passed me by because I was too kind of taking it too serious. And sometimes it is good to just stop and look around and think, whoa, like we were in Japan,
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember just waking up like, how, this is insane. I'm in Japan, I started out in a little town in the northwest of England, and in my bedroom on, a little tiny drum kit. And here I am all these years later, like living the dream of all the bands that I idolized, So I've started to enjoy things a little bit more now, and kind of really appreciate what's going on around me a little bit.
Okay, Nigel, I will hand back to you.
So you just said like you've had some like amazing moments like Japan. So in terms of playing gigs, then what's been your pride and joy? What's something that you'll always remember so far in your career that's the standout moment in terms of playing gigs? Then
there's been a hell of a lot, but recently there's been, I mean, there's three big ones, but we toured Japan twice, and that will always be, that for me was like the biggest dream come true. It's where every band wants to go, and to be honest with you, not many bands on our level go to Japan. There's not that many. Obviously the really big bands do, but so we were. Japan really stands out. We recently did the Monsters of Rock cruise in America, which really stood out as well as being incredible. But I was actually just saying to Trish before we came on that without doubt the best crowd I've ever played to, and we've ever played to, was just after the Monster Rock Cruise. We went to Brazil and we played in Sao Paulo. And there's actually a video, if you look on like my Instagram and Facebook and stuff, of literally after every single song finished, it was like you were at like a football match. You know, it was just, I've never heard anything like it. You know, chanting the Midnite City name, and you know, it was. I remember before we went on, there was a friend of mine who's in an American band, and I saw one of his posters on the wall because he played there. So I took a picture next to it and sent it to him, and he said, "Get ready for the best crowd you'll ever play in front of." And I thought, you know what, yeah, it won't be that good. But as soon as we came off, I was straight on my phone. I was like, you were right, you know. And I've never heard anything like it in my life. It was unbelievable. So that one, just purely for how crazy the crowd was,
and everything else as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about then your current band, Midnite City. You in 2023, I think it was your fourth album that you released in 2023. Yeah. So in 2017, you obviously decided, you know what, rock music or 80s kind of rock music is coming back into vogue. It's gonna, it's time to maybe go back down that route. So. Did you? Because I know you've got Miles and you've got Josh and Ryan in the band as well. Did they start with you back in 2017? How did you pull that band from friends, or how did you bring Midnite City together again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't actually know any of those guys beforehand. So it was my previous band kind of broke up at the end of 2016, and at the time I'd actually been writing. I'd written the first Midnite City album before there was even a band, and I had the vision as to what I wanted it to sound like, and what I wanted the guys to look like, as in, you know, the image and all that kind of thing, which is important when you're doing this kind of music. So, the first guy I got involved was actually Miles Meakin, our guitar player, who was I just found he was doing like YouTube videos. And he was just this incredible lead guitar player. And it's really weird, but I messaged him and found out he actually lived in Nottingham at the time, which was even more bizarre. So I'm like, you know, there's a sign that he should be in the band. So I got him in first. And then the second guy in was our keyboard player, Sean Charbet, who I kind of played with in another band. Well, I kind of knew him. We had like a side thing that we were doing at the time. So he came in on keyboards. And it was really weird because I decided I wanted to get a record deal first rather than, you know, because most bands get together and they slog it out for years and, you know, trying to get a record deal. And I'm like, I'm sick of doing that. You know what I mean? I want to get a record deal first and then we'll go from there. So we recorded 3 songs with the guy who became our first drummer, Pete Newdeck, and they weren't demos. They were proper, you know, they sounded like album quality, you know, material. And I sent them out to a bunch of labels and got about 3 or 4 offers for deals. So we signed with a German label, and then we finished off the album actually as a 4-piece.
So what stood out with the German label over the others then? What did they say or do that went, or was it money only?
It was money. Money was a big part of it, and also the fact that I knew a couple of bands that were signed to that label as well, who seemed to be doing quite well, and it was actually the label that I wanted out of before I'd even sent stuff off.
Okay.
That was kind of like the label that, and they gave us a really.
What label was that?
It was a label called AOR Heaven,
Okay.
which is now. It was kind of like unfortunately, it's not around anymore. But it was kind of for our type of music. You know, you've got Frontiers, which is the main label, and at the time they were the kind of the you know, the next, I guess, the label down from Frontiers. Unfortunately, Frontiers do not offer good record deals. I don't think a lot of bands actually read the contracts before signing with that label, but we won't go into that.
Oh no, let's. Tell us more about this contract with Fronted. I'm joking. Carry on.
Yeah, but it was they just offered us a really good contract, and they seemed to really like the band and be into what we were doing, and they were great. They were really good. So I finished recording the album as a 4-piece. I just played bass on it, and then the album came out, and then it just suddenly absolutely exploded. I mean, the reviews were just. Yeah, I wasn't really expecting it. I mean, I knew it was a good album, but I wasn't expecting it to take off as quick as it did. And then finally, we got our bass player Josh into the band, and then off we went. And 8 years later, we've just finished recording our 5th album. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind, really. It's just been kind of album touring. And it's been a bit of a journey, that's for sure.
Look, I've got to ask because you've piqued my curiosity now. We're going to come back to your 5th album in a minute, but what makes a good record deal? And you say that people don't read the Frontier, but Frontier's small codes. What was in that deal that made it a good deal? What's the difference between a bad record deal and a good record deal that you've got? I'm absolutely curious. I've never lived in that. I probably never will. But aspiring bands might be watching this. So from a very experienced guy, what makes a good record deal in your opinion?
It's tricky because I mean, record deals aren't what record deals were back in the 80s. Where you'd be signed to a major record deal, and the amount of money that.
Sure, yeah, no, I get that. But an aspiring up-and-coming band like you that hadn't got a record deal, that are looking to get one, in your situation, I'm just talking about what made that a good record deal for you as opposed to a bad record deal?
Well, first of all, it depends how much of an advance they're going to give you. So basically, they will give you X amount of money before when you sign the deal, and then they'll give you. You'll come up with an agreed figure, and they will. When you sign the contract, you'll get half of it, and when you finish the album, you hand it into the label, you get the other half of it. So obviously, the advance definitely helps to recording albums, because no matter what anybody says about being able to record at home, if you want a really good sounding album, you got to pay a lot of money. Like our last album that we just finished, for example, it just cost us seven grand to do. So it's not cheap. So obviously, a good advance is important. Also, obviously, the royalty rate. So how much you're going to get, when you start selling albums, how much you're going to get per album. Also, another really big important thing is your publishing. And this is more for me as a songwriter, because a lot of labels can sign away your publishing, which means that from the day that you sign that record deal until the day it expires, that record label own your songs. So you don't own those songs anymore; they own them.
Right.
So that was very important to me that wasn't going to happen. So I still own all the songs I've written. So that's another important.
That sounds like a big one.
That's probably the biggest one, really. And then on top of that as well, you get labels will offer to it's usually only for one video, but sometimes they'll give you a little bit of money to go towards a budget for a video. Not every label does that. Some do, some don't. Which again helps. And then also what promo they're going to do for it. When the album comes out, it's no good. I mean, we try and do as much as we can on social media, but you can release the best album in the world, but if people don't know about it, and that is part of the deal. So what PR, they're going to, once the album comes out. Yeah, and usually you get, it's not a big window of time. You might get, 2 months of promo, but that kind of, sets things up. So it's a mixture of all those things really. But the key is to actually read through them, because some, the best deals are usually the smallest deals, because you can actually the contracts, you can read them, but some labels will send you a contract that's that thick, and they use a lot of words that people, even intelligent people, don't understand, let alone rocker dudes, so they
Rocker
I think a
dudes.
lot of
Rocker dudes.
I think a lot of kids, like, not kids, even a lot of guys in bands just get excited by the fact that
They've got a record deal. Absolutely. Yeah. They think it's going to make them. Okay. So let's talk about your latest album, which is coming out soon, which will be your 5th album. So when are we looking? When will we hear the dulcet tones of Rob and the crew carooning across the airwaves? When we're looking at a release? Is that this year?
Yeah, it's coming out on November the 21st.
November the 21st. Okay. And are you going to be touring? And what's the album going to be called?
Right, the album's going to be called Bite the Bullet.
Bite the Bullet.
And we're going to be touring right after the album comes out. So the album comes out on the 21st, and we're doing a tour. It's only a short tour. We're just doing 5 dates, starting on November the 27th. And we're bringing actually an American band over, a band called Wild Street, are coming over from New York. So they're going to be doing the tour with us. So we've condensed it a little bit. We because they coming over from New York, they can't be over here for forever. So we've condensed it down, and we're going to be doing 5 dates. And I mean, obviously next year we'll be doing a ton of stuff as well. But as of right now, that's kind of like the tour just after the album comes out.
Yeah.
And are those dates booked? Have you nailed those yet? So where are you going to be singing? What's the tour dates?
Let me have a look. I've got it on my phone. Very unprofessional, I know, but there you go. We're playing. Okay, so we're November 26th. We're at Trillions in Newcastle. 27th we're at Yardbirds in Grimsby. 28th the Black Heart in London. 29th Billy Bootleggers in Nottingham, and the 30th we're going to be at 11 in Stoke.
It's all up north, apart from London. It's all up north, but there we go. That's okay. Okay, so and then obviously a lot more touring. By the sound of it, you love to tour.
Oh yeah,
you love to perform. Yeah, I was talking to a band the other day, and he said, "I don't like touring. I don't like performing in front of people." It's like, okay, that's very unusual, but okay, yeah, I know, right? So, off the last album that you did then, which was what was? Hold on, I got it here somewhere. There Goes The Neighbourhood, was it? No, that was your second album.
In at the Deep End.
In at the Deep End. So, what's your favourite track off the In the Deep End? What was your?
Ooh, that's a good one. A good question. I love every song off that album, but I think my favourite song was actually the big power ballad off it, which was released as a single and video, called "Hardest Heart to Break," which is actually probably, I would say, one of my favourite songs I've ever written. So
I've got to say, I got to listen to the album, and that stood out for me because I'm a sucker for a power ballad.
Me too.
I think everybody in my crew, I think I'm the biggest sucker for a power ballad. This one here, she don't like the softies, do you? So she likes to headbang.
There's plenty of rockers on there as well, but you can't be in a hair metal band and not have a power ballad.
Gotta have a power ballad. Gotta love my power ballads. Okay,
Rob Wylde.
There you go. Yeah.
So
that's a good one too.
Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. I love interviews where people are themselves. They don't make excuses. They don't try to be anybody that they're not. They're true to themselves. And that's very obvious, that you come across that, this is what you love. So why change? Why, be who you are, and you know what, you perform, and your music is of high quality. Because I tell you what, I have to listen to a lot of bands to narrow down the 16 albums that we're going to review. And there's a lot of what I call generic kind of classic rock bands that just there's a lot of dross out there, I'm afraid to say, and there's maybe about a dozen, 2 dozen of that your quality that are standing out, which is fantastic. So, do you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. So, thank you very much for sharing your story with us, and we wish you all the very best in the future. May it long continue. Look forward to maybe reviewing the album, and fingers crossed we give it a good rating. Otherwise, you'll never talk to us again. Absolutely, been a superstar. Thank you, Rob. And hey, everybody, if you like this sort of interview, hit the like and subscribe button. Check out Rob's band and check out this album. And it's if you like the classic, no moans about it, not going to push up. If it's classic rock, that sort of style you like, but bringing that into the modern era, then you won't go far wrong with Midnite City. Good night. God bless. Take care. Keep on rocking.
See you guys.